Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Papa Boris, and oh my god, I am so excited. Finally! Finally, the Pathfinder Adventures game has come to tablets. I don't think I've been as excited for a game to be released since like Hearthstone, and before that, like Diablo 2 back in high school. So I am just unbelievably excited this game is finally here. Go download it right now. It's free to play. Please give Obsidian some money after you play it for free. It's an amazing game. This is the digital version of the Pathfinder Adventure Card Game, Rise of the Runelords. I have just posted a video explaining how the game is played, and right now I'm going to go ahead and play with my 6-player dream team. We're going to create a party. For maximum challenge, we'll do 6 characters, because that is the hardest way to play. Well, the hardest way to play is probably solo, because it's totally broken. So in this video, I'm going to go ahead and make a 6-character party, and I'm pretty much going to spend the entire video just explaining why I chose the characters that I did, and building their decks. So the Rise of the Runelords game, it's pretty complicated, but among hardcore players, it does have a reputation for being a little bit on the easy side. So you can honestly probably play whatever 6-character party that you want and still make it through the game, as long as you play well. Maybe you'll lose a scenario here and there, but you'll do well. However, I'm just going to give some advice for what I think enables you to win the most consistently and to minimize your odds of losing. So I don't want you to take this advice as being like you have to do this or else you're going to fail, but more of like if you want the easiest experience possible, here's what I recommend. So for a 6-character party, I'm going to break it down into sort of 3 groups. Mandatory, highly recommended, and then personal taste. So again, nothing was really mandatory, but just to give you an idea of how important I think the characters are. I think we're going to start with Seelah. She's the pretty much only one character that I call mandatory. She is just so incredibly good for a 6-character party that if your life depended on winning, I don't know how you could argue against having her. And what's really cool about Seelah the Paladin is that, it kind of shows off the strength of this game. She doesn't necessarily look that good when you first look at her. So, like, her stats, kind of crappy. She only has 2 skills, melee strength, or melee and divine. They're both pretty bad, d8 plus 2. Her combat, d8 plus 2, not that great. Her biggest die is a d10 in charisma. It would have been better either in wisdom or strength. So, sticking true to theme, like in Dungeons & Dragons, where paladins are required to have a high charisma, even though it doesn't actually do much for them. Her biggest die is here, kind of being wasted. Then you look at her cards list. This just hurts to look at. So she has 3 weapons, but her favorite card type is armor. Armor is, in my opinion, underrated, but in many players' eyes, it is the worst card type in the game. She's forced to start with an armor in her opening hand. She can never have any items, which is kind of a pain. She just doesn't have anything particularly amazing going on here. And then if you look at her powers, her hand size is 4, which sucks. She does have all the proficiencies, which is good. But then her powers are kind of interesting and a little bit tricky to understand. So first, she has a Crusade power. You may examine the top card of your deck at the start of your location deck at the start of the turn. So it's built-in scouting, good. If it's a boon, put it on the bottom of the deck. What? So if I have a good card coming up, I lose it. It goes to the bottom. I remember the first time I looked at her sheet, I was like, well, that sucks. I mean, I'm glad she has a scouting power. That's great. Scouting's awesome, but why do I have to lose the boon? The thing that you have to understand is that this is actually like the single strongest power in your entire party. Putting a boon on the bottom of the deck is kind of the same thing as defeating it. As long as that location deck never gets shuffled, that boon is essentially a card that you never have to explore. You never have to get through on your way to the henchman. In a 6-player party, time is the most significant enemy you will ever have. This power essentially amounts to free explorations. She doesn't have to spend anything to get these free explorations. She just has to start her turn somewhere and scout into a boon. It's ridiculous. And then even more ridiculous, she can put a power feat, Ceaseless Crusade, to make the scouting ability trigger at the beginning and end of your turn. Wow! So that's potentially 2 free explorations per turn without spending any resources. This is just too good to pass up in a 6-player party. She also has Inspired Grace, which again is one of those powers that doesn't look that great at first, but you realize after a while it's just incredible. You can discard the top card of your deck to add a d6 to your check. This is any check. If the top card is a blessing, it recharges instead of being discarded. So again, I remember looking at this the first time thinking, well, this blows. What if I lose my cure spell? What if I lose a weapon that I wanted to get? And what if I lose a good card? I mean, sure, I might get off scot-free if it's a blessing, but if not, it's discarded forever. Thing is, this is amazing. Getting to add a d6 to all your checks is incredible. It makes her a very versatile character. She can pick up any boon. She's got a shot at picking it up. And if it's an important monster, she can secure her chances of killing it. If she can be at just about any location and have a reasonable shot at closing it. In a six-player game, that versatility, especially for closing locations, which are checks you cannot afford to fail, is really, really strong. So she's got some really, really, really good powers, and that basically makes up for a shitty skill list and a shitty card list, because just a character could be like literally a semi-sentient pile of turds, and if it had this ability, I'd still want it in my party. So that's Seelah, and she's the only character that I call mandatory, quote unquote. Again, nothing's truly mandatory, but she's the only one I consider, like god tier for a six-player party. Next up, let me go through some characters that I highly recommend. Number one of them is Amiri, the barbarian. I think most people are probably going to want to put one of the warriors into their party, so either Valeros or Amiri. And I'm not going to explain this assertion that I'm about to make, but I'm just going to make it. I think that Valeros is better in a small group, and Amiri is better in a big group. It's not to say that Amiri is bad in a small group or vice versa, but having a bigger group plays more to Amiri's strengths, and having a small group plays more to Valeros' strengths. Again, I'm not gonna defend that here, but if you're curious, feel free to ask, and maybe I'll make a strategy video for it. So what's Amiri got? Well, her skills are fine. She doesn't have too much. She just has D12 plus 2 for melee, and then she has survival, which is D6, wisdom plus 3. Not too many skills going on here. Her stat array is good, though. She's got a D12 for strength, which is nice. Survival is, in my opinion, like the most important skill in the game after the main skills. I consider the main skills to be melee, ranged, arcane, and divine, because those are the skills that you can fight monsters with. Everything after that I call secondary skills, and of these, survival is the most important, because towards the end of the adventure, there's a lot of locations that are closed with survival, and they tend to pop up a lot. So, survival is very important. Amiri has that, which is good. She has a high minimum roll for it, which is good. So even though this doesn't look like much with only 2 skills, it's actually pretty damn solid. Then for powers, she's got Barbarian Rage, of course. She can bury a card to add D10 to strength, melee, or constitution checks. So the obvious application of this, of course, is melee in combat. She can bury her junky cards to get a whopping D10 added to her roll. But don't dismiss the fact that you can also use this on strength and constitution checks. So if she's picking up an important weapon or armor, or most significantly, closing a location, being able to add to those checks helps a lot in a big party. Then she has Move Fast, and this seems a little bit innocuous. Like, you can move at the end of your turn, so like, why do I care? I can move anywhere I want to at the beginning of my turn, so does it really matter if I move at the end? It's, again, another testament to the quality of this game, that there's a lot of subtlety to it that's very easy to overlook. The reason this is good is that, in a game with a lot of players, you're sometimes going to be going down to the wire. And this ability sometimes literally makes a difference between winning and losing. Because if she can close a location on the last turn she ever gets, and then move at the end of her turn to an open location to be ready to temp close it, that can make the difference between being able to corner the villain or the villain having one location to run through. Even more significantly, though, is this power feat, Move Another. With a power feat, she can move and pull somebody to her. This is just got all kinds of uses. It can facilitate trades among characters. What I will be using it for the most, though, is for Seelah. If Seelah ends her turn at a closed location, which will happen if she just beat the henchman and closed the location, then her Crusade ability is essentially wasted at the start of her next turn. Furthermore, if she has this power feat, and at the end of her turn, she scouts a monster, then again, at the start of her next turn, the Crusade ability is wasted because she already saw the monster there. She's just going to see it again when she scouts at the beginning of her turn. Amiri can essentially, through Seelah, get bonus explorations out of Move Another by moving Seelah to a different location and letting her trigger extra uses of Crusade. That can add up to extra explorations for the whole team. So that's why I put Amiri in the highly recommended category when you are building your 6-character party. And that's all I'll say about her. The last character that I will put on a pedestal and say is strongly recommended is Mariziel the Rogue, who does come for free if you download the digital version of the game. So I've already talked about her in my How to Play video, so I'm not going to explain her here. I just want to explain why I think she's so good in a 6-player party. So there's a couple of things she has going for her. Number one is this evasion. Typically, you might think, well, that's not a good thing because you don't want to evade your encounter. You don't want to lose a turn evading. That's bad, right? Well, what she can do is if she finds a villain, she can evade the villain instead of fighting him. That means you now know what location the villain is in. And the fewer cards that were left in the location when she found the villain, the more confidently and the more assuredly you can set up a snare to corner the villain. With the roll cards that arrive at the end of Adventure 3, Mauricio actually gets the option to improve this with a power feat so she can evade an encounter and leave the card on top of the deck. So that's just incredible for a 6-player party because it is almost always better to corner the villain, to scout him, and then set up a snare and corner him than it is to kill the villain and have the villain run around. Just time-wise, it's almost always better to have the scouting and snaring. So if she finds the villain, she doesn't have to fight him. She can leave him on top of the deck, and now you can spend the rest of your turns at your leisure to set up a trap and corner the villain. So just having that in your party, having that extra opportunity in your party is just really, really strong. The other thing about Mauricio is she may look like a lone wolf character. She's, got this sneak attack thing that, of course, encourages her to be alone. And you typically don't think of lone wolf characters as being helpful to the team, but Mauricio really brings a lot to the team. By being incredibly good at combat, she does not have to use up resources from the rest of the party in order to succeed at her checks. So by being very self-sufficient, she actually does help the party because she limits the drain on party resources. Furthermore, she's got the party utility with this evasion, as I mentioned. And in her cards list, she helps the party out as well by having 6 items. Items at the beginning of the game suck dick. But by the end of the game, items get really, really good. So having a character with just a big old stash of items is really, really helpful to the party because it prevents other characters from needing to spend card feats on items in order for the party to be able to carry all the loot you found. That's kind of the deal with items, is they're either really good or really bad for the most part. So just having that space for items there is very, very solid early on. Not early on, later on. Okay, so that's it. I would say Seelah is mandatory. Amiri and Mauricio are highly recommended, and the rest is personal taste. So who else do I put in here? I'm going to go ahead and put Ezran the Wizard in, and I'm just going to be totally honest with you. This is totally personal taste. I think that the other 2 arcane characters in the game, why can't I see his skills? Lem and Seoni are both probably objectively stronger than Ezran. He does have some cool powers, so whenever he acquires a card that has the magic trait during an exploration, he gets a free exploration. And he's got this thing where whenever he plays an arcane spell, he can look at the top card of his deck and put it in his hand if it's a spell, which is nifty, but again, I don't think he's the strongest. I just think he's really fun. I just love him. He has more spells than anybody. He's got 8 spells. That's more spells than what the Bard gets. That's more spells than what the Sorceress gets. And that's pretty much entirely what I'm basing my decision on because I love spells. So absolutely no objective reason for Ezran, just here because I love him. Another character whom I love is Harsk, the Dwarven Ranger. So Harsk is one of those characters who isn't as good as he looks. Let me explain exactly why. So he seems really cool. He has a 5 hand size. He's got an end of turn scouting ability. And he's got Sniper Shot here. So this allows him to recharge a card to add a d4 to a combat check at another location. And he can upgrade this with power feats to a d4 plus 1 and a d4 plus 2. With roll cards, this can go all the way up to a d4 plus 4 if you want it to. So that's really nifty. It, smooths out combat for everybody. He gets some scouting, which is good. It gives you a chance to find the villain and, if you find something that he can't handle, someone else can come and handle it. If he finds a boon that someone else really wants, they can come grab it. So it's got a lot of qualitative and quantitative value. But quite frankly, this guy is just bad at combat. So D8 plus 3 is weak, especially when you factor in the fact that ranged weapons are typically worse than melee weapons. What happens with Harsk is he's kind of weak early on, but as he gets skill feats, he gets stronger. When it's a D8 plus 7, that's pretty damn good. But then once he cannot put any more skill feats into dexterity, the monsters get way out of his league, especially the henchmen and the villains. So he's this character who's pretty much always going to be sucking up party resources whenever he encounters even moderately difficult combat checks. So that's a drag. It really does hold the party back. The other thing is his stats are all jacked. So he's got this D12 Constitution, which is pretty much wasted. That would obviously have been way better to have on dexterity. Then he would have been more combat capable. He has some good skills. Well, perception's pretty worthless in my opinion, but survival's very good. But the wisdom's only a d6. If this Constitution die were smaller, Wisdom could have easily been a D8 or maybe even a D10. I would have loved, frankly, to have this Constitution rolled back to a D6 and make Dexterity a D12 and Wisdom a D8, or make them both D10s. But, you know, he's a dwarf, so I get it's thematic. Yes, he's not that nimble and he's very hardy. But these stats just really kind of fuck him up. And then in the cards list, you know, it's nothing too terrible here. But the fact that he doesn't have any allies holds him back a little bit, because that limits how many extra explorations he can have. He does have 6 allies and blessings total, which is fine. But I would have loved to see, like, you know, maybe 3 weapons instead of 5, and 3 allies instead of 1. He would be, like, just objectively a stronger character in that case. Because his favorite card type is weapon. He only needs to find 1 weapon before he can start shooting at things. And he can recharge cards pretty endlessly with his sniper shot power. So he's always cycling through his deck really fast. So lowering his weapon count and upping his allies would have made him a stronger character for sure. So, he's just a guy I love. I just love this grumpy old dwarf. You know, I have a soft spot for him. I love scouting. I'll take pretty much any character who's got scouting, but I don't want you to think that he's like a mandatory character to have for your party to be as successful as possible. You know, just putting in basically some good combat capable character like Seelah the monk, or even Kira for extra healing in the party. She's very combat capable because she can just play blessings willy-nilly and heal herself while she wants. Plus, she can also use spells, which is pretty good for combat. So just having a more combat-capable character is probably more useful than having a Harsk. But again, I just love him. And the last spot is Linny the Druid. There we go, not the dwarf. Linny the Druid. So Linny has a couple of things I like. She's got 6 spells, which is the second most after Ezran, and I do love spells. She doesn't have any weapons or armor, so her deck is very focused. It's not got slots taken up by, you know, crap. And she has some pretty sweet powers. So let's take a quick look here. She has Animal Trick, which allows her to reveal an animal ally to add a d4 to any check. This is some really strong versatility. It's very, very good for the team to have someone who can pick up pretty much any boon, pretty much close any location. And then she also has this. When she plays an ally with the animal trait, it gets recharged instead of discarded. That's really strong because basically means that all animal allies are rechargeable explorations. And in this 6-player game, you have to play your allies, you have to play your blessings for extra explorations, or you will run out of time. So having a character with rechargeable explorations is really great. Beast form is pretty crappy, but you know, it's there. So why do I put Linny in the personal taste category instead of the recommended category? Well, the reason for this is very simple. If you look at her stats, Linny is shit up a creek if she has to fight a monster and does not have a combat spell. Her strength sucks dicks. She doesn't have any weapons in her deck, so she has to use beast form to discard a card to get a d10, reveal an animal for a d4, so it's a d10 plus a d4. It's not nearly good enough to confidently take out anything. So it's just always a struggle, and she's always using up party resources pretty much anytime she has to fight. The other problem is not to do with her, but just to Rise of the Rune Lords. There's only 2 inflicts. There's only 2 divine combat spells in the box at the beginning of the game. So she only has 2 combat cards out of 15 to start with. And even as the game goes along, apart from Holy Light, which is a card in the base set, there really just like aren't any improvements. There's like no good divine spells for a really long time for combat. For combat, that is. So she's always kind of struggling when it comes to combat. Some people just deal with it. Some people give her a weapon card defeat and rely on that. You can have another character give her a weapon, just like hand it over to her at the beginning of each scenario or at some other point, and try to deal with the problem that way. But really, the thing with her is she's an investment character. When your animal trick is at like a d4 plus 2 and eventually a plus 3 or a plus 4, and you've got like 3 skill feats in wisdom, I mean, you're like automatically recharging all your spells. You're like almost automatically picking up every single boon you find, almost automatically closing every single location. You're incredibly strong. At the beginning, though, her party has to hold her up. So Linny's a great character for the end game, but if you don't like having someone who like needs to sit on the party's shoulders for a lot of the early scenarios, then Linny is not a character that you want to play. You'd be better off taking someone who's a bit more combat capable, such as Seelah the monk, or Kira the cleric, who's also divine, but just way more combat capable than Linny. So the main characters I've left out are Seelah and Kira. Those are two of the characters of the 5 that are not in my party, who are considered by members of the community to be very, very strong, and whom I have not included. Don't worry though, I will have a video series called The Rejects, in which I play with these 5 characters that did not make it into my Dream Team party. So I will be playing with this motley crew of losers in another video series later on. So we'll see them all in action, but this is the party that I will take with me into my adventure. So the last thing we'll do in this video is we'll create everybody's starting decks, and I'll talk a lot of strategy about the decisions that I make. And then that's it. That's all we'll do in this video. So, if you just want to watch me play the game, you can just stop this video and fire up the next one where I actually play. I probably should have said that at the beginning of the video and not right now, but hey, better late than never, right? Okay, so let's go ahead and start out with weapon selection. I'm going to go ahead and keep it pretty simple for Seelah. We don't want short swords because short swords suck. I don't even know why they're in the game. We'll just give her a couple of long swords and a mace. By the way, the reason I'm using maces is partially because I have to, because there's not enough longswords to go around, but also partially because it's nice to have some blunt weapons. In the third scenario of the prologue, the henchmen are harder if you fight them with piercing or slashing weapons, so having a bludgeoning weapon somewhere in your toolkit is just a nice thing to have to make things a bit easier. For Amiri, again, I don't know why short swords are in here, or quarterstaves. It's just terrible. We're going to go ahead and give her 2 long spears. She really, really, really likes long spears. So if you haven't seen this before, long spears, you cannot discard them for an extra die, but if you fail a check with a long spear, you can discard it then to re-roll all the dice that you used. So that's nice. It's like you essentially have a bonus, but you don't have to discard the card to get the bonus if you don't need it. Unlike, say, a longsword, in which you have to commit before you make the check to either discarding it for the bonus or not having the bonus and risk losing the check. I would actually take all long spears if I could, but as you can see, there are no long spears to go around. So we're going to go ahead and give her a couple more maces. I could have taken this extra longsword here, I guess, but I'm rarely going to be discarding it, simply because Amiri, if she's going to discard this, it's pointless. She might as well use her Berserker Rage, Barbarian Rage, and bury a different card to get a D10 instead of a D6. So I'll have a longsword here because it's technically better than a mace, but I'm realistically not that likely to use it, so I don't mind taking a couple of bludgeoning weapons, just to have that easier time in the third scenario with the skeleton henchman. For Marizio the Rogue, we're going to keep it real simple. Just take a couple of crossbows. She does not start with a weapon in her hand, guaranteed. She can, of course, get lucky and start with one, but it's nice to just find a crossbow at some point and just keep it in her hand. Harsk, however, I'm going to do the opposite approach. I don't want to give him crossbows. I want to give him daggers. The reason for this is that Harsk sucks giant flaming monkey dicks at combat. If he were to shoot a crossbow, he'd be shooting 2d8 plus 3, which is just not good enough to feel confident about literally even the very easiest monsters in the game. So I want to use a dagger. These recharge, and you can use your range skill plus a d4 plus another d4. So that's a d8 plus 2d4 plus 3. That's still not great, don't get me wrong, but at least it's something that I could conceivably consider using and not feeling totally terrible about it. And then I'm also going to have a sling, which sucks, and I'll be looking to replace this because there's not enough daggers. But this is a weapon that you can discard for an extra die, which Harsk needs to, in my opinion, because he just sucks at fighting. Ezran is going to keep a quarterstaff. He's a wizard. He's not that keen on fighting in melee. Having a weapon in his deck actually is a hindrance to the character. But basically, I don't feel the need to take a mace because he is almost certainly always going to discard this card when he uses it. And 2d6 for a quarterstaff versus a d8 plus a d4 for a mace is a wash. So I might as well keep the mace, which is more valuable for its higher initial die for the other characters. Okay, so that's everybody's weapons, I think. Linny does not have any weapons, and everyone else got one. Let's go ahead and do our armors. So armor's very, very easy. Shields suck. They suck horribly, so just give everybody anything other than shields. Some people have pointed out that you can actually give chainmail to characters who aren't proficient in armor, because banish versus bury doesn't really matter on basic items. But whatever, I'll be thematic. We'll give the light armor characters light armor. We'll give the heavy armor characters heavy armor. Ezran and Linny don't get armor, so that's it for armor. Next, let's do items. So items are tricky because they suck. They are horrible in the beginning of the game. There's just not that many good items, and most of them are not basic. So yeah, these are just total garbage. Pretty much the best item is Thieves' Tools. because this allows you to auto-succeed at most of the barriers that are in the deck. Now, a lot of barriers, it's not that important to be able to succeed against them. Some of them are just nice, and if you succeed at them, you get a bonus. Otherwise, if you don't succeed, they get banished, and it doesn't really even matter. Some of them are swarm barriers. Those are the worst ones. They make everybody at an open location fight something, but the Thieves' Tools doesn't help. Anyway, but still, for things like collapsed ceiling and slashing blade and pit and whatever, it's just nice to have Thieves' Tools. I'm also going to give Amiri a crowbar. So crowbars can be used to boost your non-combat strength checks. So if Amiri finds a weapon that she wants to pick up, she can maybe use the crowbar to help get it without having to bury a card to her Barbarian Rage or making anybody else in the party use Blessing. Seelah has no items. Mauricio is tricky because she has tons of items, and items are bad. So it's like, what the hell do you put in her deck? So here's how I like to do it. She starts by default with 2 Thieves' Tools. I don't find that to be super valuable. I also don't find Caltrops to be very valuable for her because she can just discard it for sneak attack and use that to kill a monster. She doesn't need these Caltrops. I also don't think that Potion of Vision is very good. Potions are generally pretty bad. Let me take a moment to talk about them. Fortitude doesn't come up that often. Hiding, Stealth almost never comes up. Perception almost never comes up. The only really good one is Potion of Glibness, because diplomacy is used for human allies. So if you find a human ally and you're not likely to make the check to pick it up, you can use the Potion of Glibness to essentially convert this item into an extra exploration, which is fine. And Mauricio can recharge cards that she's not using for sneak attack, so if she never has a chance to use the Potion of Glibness, it's not a big deal. She can just recharge it or discard it for a sneak attack. So what the hell else do you give her? Well, I'm going to go ahead and give her the Amulet of Mighty Fists. This is a card that lets you get a D4 and the magic trait to your combat check as long as you don't use a weapon or play an attack spell. So basically, until she finds one of her crossbows, she can use this to help her combat checks. Also, there are some enemies in the game that cannot be defeated unless your trait has the magic check, which eventually is like not a problem at all. But in the beginning, when nobody has magic weapons, you just can't defeat those things, and it's a pain in the ass. So having the Amulet of Mighty Fists in your party reduces the odds of that really screwing you. So what the hell else do you give her? Well, I am going to go ahead and give her some more conditional items. So we'll give her a Sage's Journal. You can reveal this to add a D4 to a check against a henchman or villain, just because why not? Oh boy, I guess, sure. I'll give her a crowbar to maybe help against some strength checks, and we'll give her Potion of Fortitude, even though I fully expect to never use that. So Mauricio, having a big item stash eventually helps. Right now, though, not so much. For allies, I hate burglars, because they cannot be discarded for an extra exploration, and Mauricio doesn't really have that much trouble with barriers anyway. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give her a Troubadour and a Standard Bearer. Real quickly, in my opinion, the best allies are the Troubadours, the Standard Bearers, and the Sages. These are the ones that can be used to give a D6 to a non-combat check of 2 different skills, and they can also be discarded to explore. So having extra explorations, good. Occasionally getting an important skill bonus to close a location, also solid. I just did items and allies for the rogue for some reason. I don't know why. Let's go ahead and take a look at Ezrin. I'm going to go ahead and be a little min-maxy here. I'm going to give him 3 sages. The reason for this is that we're going to be relying on Ezrin to close locations that have an arcane check. It's also really important for him to pick up spells, both because spells are useful and also because if he picks up a spell, he gets an extra exploration. So using a sage to recharge it to secure a spell allows him to essentially not have to discard a card in order to get an extra exploration. So we're going to go for all sages for him. And for Ezrin, I will give him 2 codexes. These these are actually pretty bad in my opinion, but these are kind of like a way to convert an item slot into an extra exploration. Let's say Ezrin encounters a spell that's hard to pick up. He can discard a codex to get an extra D12 to acquire the spell, and if he picks it up, then with his hero power, he gets an extra exploration. So it's like you converted a codex into an extra exploration. That's about as good as you can hope for with this guy. And I'm also going to take Amulet of Life. Ezrin has a big hand size, but he has no way to profitably use dead cards in his hand, so you don't really want to have him holding on to too many cards. But Amulet of Life, I feel like, is a good one to hold on to, just because it's so devastating if he gets hurt. You could also give Ezrin Thieves' Tools. I just found that in my experience, I did play a live game of this 6-player, and I was the Ezran player. I had Thieves' Tools the whole time and almost never got to use them. So he's always going to the place with spells. It's just not that likely he comes up against a barrier at the right time of the right kind and gets to use those profitably. But you could totally give those to him, and that's fine. Let's go to Harsk here. So Harsk starts out with some junk. I'm going to give him a potion of glibness because he has really bad charisma, and so he can use it to pick up an ally and get an extra exploration, or he can just shoot an arrow with it and not give a shit. And then for the other card, I'm just going to give him another pair of Thieves' Tools. He'll often be going into places with lots of monsters, so having double the Thieves' Tools, double the fun, go for it, connect 4, makes it more likely that he can get past those barriers. He only gets one ally, and I'm going to let him keep the crow that he starts with, because it's nice for somebody other than Linny to have an animal. If one of Linny's animals gets banished and you found a different ally over the course of the scenario, she won't be able to get an animal ally back, and her having a non-animal ally is devastating. So having somebody in your party with an animal ally is just good as a reassurance for Linny, and most likely we're not going to be using the crow's ability. Most likely we will just be playing this for extra explorations. Okay, so for Linny, we want crows because dogs are shitty. D10 to perception. Perception is like one of the most useless skills in the game. So actually, there's enough crows. I'm just going to give her all crows. Dogs are just really, really bad. I mean, they're fun, and most of the time, all the animal's ever going to do is be revealed for a bonus D4, but whatever. Crows are better than dogs, so in they go. For items for Linny, these are just terrible selections. I'm going to give her 2 caltrops. You can give her a caltrops and a Thieves' Tools, which is totally legit. But she's just so awful and so unprotected that having a way to kill off enemies seems like a pretty good deal to me. Okay, let's, I think we've done all the items. I think we need to take care of allies. So I don't want the guide. I mean, the guide's okay. Amiri does have the survival skill. She could use the guide, but the sage is just more versatile, you know, so if you were going to do that, might as well just do a sage. We'll give her a troubadour and a standard bearer, and Night Watch is terrible. We'll give her a standard bearer and a sage. Okay, and the last thing left then are spells. This is the most complicated part. So for Seelah the Paladin, Cure, easy choice. For Linny, there's some garbage here. Let's get rid of it. So a lot of people like to play with 2 cures. I find that that's a bit redundant. I'm just going to keep 1. I definitely want both inflicts because she just desperately needs any kind of combat spell she can get her hand on. And on top of that, I'm going to keep this strength. This is pretty useful. Getting to beef up someone's strength for a turn is just nice to be able to help your allies, but also she can use it on herself in those desperate moments when she does not have an inflict on hand. So there is some questionable stuff here. Like Detect Magic is a scouting card. It's really not very good, but it's just a cyclable card that you can play to get rid of it, and until there's anything better, you can just have that in your deck as a placeholder. You could also get a second copy of Strength, which is an option. And it's actually not a bad call, but I'll keep the Detect Magic Scouting for now. That's interesting. I don't think this is actually in the base game. Eloquence. This is essentially the same thing as Glibness, except it is basic. However, we don't have the 2 Charisma characters, Lem or Sione, and without those 2, getting bonuses to Charisma isn't that useful. It's a little bit marginal at best, so I'm not going to bother taking that. For Ezran, then we have a lot of choices to make. So, Sleep is terrible. I don't know why you'd ever take it. Get out of here. Stride, garbage. Arcane Armor, who gives a shit. I'm going to take as many lightning touches as I can, because they have a cooler animation in this game. So we have, right now, 5 combat spells and invisibility. I want to explain why I'm taking invisibility. It's very easy to be like, okay, well, why take invisibility when you can just take a combat spell and kill the monster? Well, if you find a villain, you can evade him, keep him in his deck. If you need to make the occasional stealth check, it just adds some versatility to the character. And sometimes you'll find things that you can't use a combat spell against, so being able to run away is nice. So I like to have 1 invisibility in Ezran's deck. We're going to go ahead and also give him a strength to help out the party and maybe help Linny when she needs to fight things with her fists. And I'm going to go ahead and get rid of Detect Magic. I will take this Eloquence. It's not in the real card game. Please note, there will be some differences between this game and the physical card game, but every single difference that you see was approved by the designers of the card games. These are things that they wish they could do in their real card game, but they can't because of the physical limitations. So I think, taking advantage of the new things that are here is legit. We'll take this. Every now and then, if somebody has a chance to pick up an ally, this is a way of essentially turning a spell card into an extra exploration for the team by helping them pick them up. So with 5 combat spells and of course that quarterstaff and the evasion spell, Ezran should be pretty safe, and then he's got a couple of spells here to help out the party. Eventually, as better spells come up, I will reduce the number of combat spells that I have. And of course, Ezran will eventually put all of his card feats into spells, so he'll eventually have 11 spells, and he'll have more room for, nifty fun stuff. But for now, I just want to make sure that if I need to fight something, I can fight it. Okay, folks, I think that is it. So the characters' decks have been built. Hopefully I didn't forget to do anything. Stick around. In the next video, we're actually going to play the first scenario, Bringandoom, and hopefully not fail pathetically. I'll see you guys soon.